The Minnesota Vikings have had quite an eventful week, and we're here to catch you all up. What's the deal with Aaron Rodgers? Who is Jordan Mason, and why does that trade make sense, even though it felt really weird? The latest news on Garrett Bradbury, and a whole hell of a lot more. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL. Anything for him?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, in the top left corner is producer Dave, and we have Marzipan running around here, having a good time, chewing on some bones. Dave, we had a good weekend. One of our most successful weekends on the channel ever. Broke 5,400 subscribers, and we want to continue that momentum. Please make sure while you're here, like the video, subscribe, ring the bell. I know it's the same thing you hear on every single YouTube channel, but it does make a difference for us. And you guys are already here. We really appreciate that. Plus, the show is sponsored by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Let me tell you, they're a reason why we're able to keep the lights on, and that is because of our friends and our own hard work. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing good. We had a good weekend this weekend. 2O bloggers did rather well as you know, the Real Forno shows we had all week, and Sal and the NFC North show. It was a good week.
So
good week
was
for
Darren
the Vikings too.
Was Darren on time?
Yes, he was.
Oh, I'm proud of him. He finally gets a little bit of credit. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, into the show. We're going to have a little bit of fun here, and it's going to be a really good one. And let's start off with the thing that everybody wants to know. Aaron Rodgers. Is he coming to the Minnesota Vikings? Well, right now, probably not. If you want to look at some betting market stuff, I saw some stuff online where betting markets have decreased the likelihood of Aaron Rodgers coming to the Vikings underneath retirement. Your mileage is going to vary in how much you want to trust that kind of stuff. Usually betting markets have a good vibe on what's going on. So take that for what it's worth. I could not tell you yes or no whether or not he's going to come. I just don't see it happening. But there was one indication from earlier today, kind of talking about Aaron Rodgers. We're going to tie the two together. The official release of Garrett Bradbury. And it was interesting because they gave him a post-June 1st designation, Dave, which felt kind of weird on the surface. Why would they give him a post-June 1st designation? Because it's only
just that.
It's only a $2.4 million dead cap hit. That's not a lot. But it shrinks down to $814K for just this year. And they will take the remainder, which I believe, doing the math in my head, is $1.628 million next year. Well, I think it happened because of a few things. First off, let's talk about why Garrett Bradbury wasn't traded. Trade markets are weird. And this isn't Madden football where you can get optimum value for a guy who's 30 years old on the final year of his contract. This is reality. Teams aren't willing to give up draft capital for a guy who does not have much upside, who's an average football player. Now, when you look at Ed Ingram, Ingram is younger, Ingram is cheaper, and Ingram theoretically has upside where Bradbury doesn't. Ingram is in his fourth season in the NFL. Bradbury's about to enter his seventh. So theoretically, and this is a lot of times how organizations think, Bradbury is a finished product. You're not going to get better from him. You're going to get what you're going to get. And there's value to that. But when it comes to the trade market, you're chasing upside. You're chasing plus value. I want to find somebody who's going to give me more than what he already is. Theoretically, Ed Ingram could still be that guy. Now, your mileage is going to vary on if he's ever going to be better than what he is. But going into the fourth year, theoretically, there could still be some upside there. Markets are always different. Antonio Brown got a third and a fifth, and he was arguably the best receiver of the 2010s. Now, he kind of went AWOL a few months later with the whole helmet thing and the Raiders. That's a whole different story. But at the time, a third and a fifth felt insane value for him because trade markets are always weird and they're volatile. And just because one player draws something does not mean another will. So the fact that the Vikings couldn't get anything for Bradbury to me isn't that big of a surprise. I thought maybe they could get a sixth or like a seventh round pick swap or something like that with a team, but they weren't able to do so. And that kind of stuff happens. I don't think it's necessarily a big deal that they couldn't get it done. It would have been great. Like the Ed Ingram trade was awesome because let's just be honest with ourselves. Nobody thought Ed Ingram was going to fetch anything. Nobody did. But here we are.
But with Ed, it could be some team goes, we scouted him when he came out as a rookie. We still believe we can fix him type of deal. And that's why they gave it up.
And that's why you see a lot of teams, one of them being like the Los Angeles Chargers. The Dallas Cowboys do this a lot. Just sign a bunch of former first-round picks and hope you can be the one that fixes them. Does it always work?
Have done it.
Oh, of course. It doesn't always work. But it's also why NFL general managers late in the draft will just pick former five-star recruits. Because theoretically, there's something there. And there's something that you can grow and nurture and develop. And coaches have a mindset of, I can fix you. That's how they have to be. They have to be, I can fix you. I can improve you. Because they are teachers. And that is the whole goal of a teacher, is to make you better. The job of a front office is to tell you, you're wrong, you can't, and I'm not letting you. And that's where you have to have like the yin and the yang. It's why like the United States government is technically 3 branches. They're supposed to balance each other out and not let anybody get overpowered. The same thing goes with an NFL front office. You don't want to have like the head coach or the GM to have almighty power. There has to be some balance there. There has to be a working relationship. And that's where the front office has to say, no, this guy sucks. I'm not bringing him in. I don't care if you think you can fix him. My job is to tell you you can't. And that's where some of this ends up lying. Now, the Houston Texans, what they're doing with their offensive line is baffling. Like trading Laramie Tunsil. I mean, they got a good haul. They got a really nice haul for him, but you're going to move Titus Howard out to left tackle, which albeit is his normal spot, but Titus Howard hasn't been very good. And now you're going to have Blake Fisher at right tackle, who's okay-ish. And you have holes all along the interior. This is like a disaster zone for the Houston Texans. Poor CJ Stroud. That's all I can say. Poor CJ Stroud. But it also speaks to why Ed Ingram also got a draft pick where Bradbury didn't. There's a lot of different nuance to it. And it's like, we can have the conversation all day. Bradbury's better than Ingram. Sure. But that's not how markets work. There's so many different levels to it. But then now we can transition into, why did they do the post-June 1st thing? Kind of looking at it from a vacuum, it's like, okay, why? I just don't understand. It doesn't make sense why they would want to do this. Well, it kind of does, Dave, because a dollar in hand is a dollar in the bush is cheaper than a dollar in hand. Or sorry, a dollar tomorrow is cheaper than a dollar today. Your dollar is going to be worth more next year. It's going to cost you less than it would be this year. So what, like $2.4 million this year, it would be like around like just under 1% of the cap. That same price next year is going to be like 0.2% less. So it's going to cost you less by percentage of the salary cap to move some along to next year. And that's kind of what the Vikings are doing. They also want to maximize what they have this year. And having an extra $1.62 million could be huge. It could allow them to make a summer signing. Could allow them to make a trade at the deadline. It could allow them to do a lot of different things. Plus, if they don't end up using that money, Dave, it just pushes to next year anyways. And by pushing to next year, well, guess what? It would have been like the same thing that they just took the cap hit this year. So it's honestly a win-win situation for the Vikings. If they have to use it, they're going to use it. And if they don't, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter one bit. So they're giving themselves as much flexibility now as they can. And that's been a huge part of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's path to restoring the Minnesota Vikings to what they are. a team with flexibility, the ability to do a lot of different things. They're in a good spot because of how this team has been constructed. And I think that it's a really, really good process by the Minnesota Vikings. And now with that little bit of extra money, it can factor into a lot of different things. They just hosted Jeff Okudah on a visit. They hosted Rondale Moore over the weekend. But I don't think this has anything to do with Aaron Rodgers. If Rodgers was going to be here, Dave, he'd already have been here. He'd already be here. And that's the long and the short of it. Now, if we get news that J.J. McCarthy's knee is exploding and he's going to be out for the year, then we can have a conversation about Rodgers because this team is set up for a quarterback. But right now, no, I just don't see it.
Now, I got a question for you.
Go ahead.
When we read that he's going to get cut if he doesn't get traded, who generally puts out that information, the team or the player's agent?
Ooh, that's a good one. I believe that comes from the team as a signal like, hey, if you want him, come get him. And sometimes that works. The Texans gave a 7th round pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars to get Christian Kirk. It can work because if you want the guy, then you don't have to fight for him on the open market. So it can work. It does not work that often, but that's also a good question because maybe it does come from the player's agent. I think it comes from teams.
Because the player's agent, if you're looking at it from the agent, and the agent doesn't want to be dictated to where his player's going, lets it loose knowing most likely his player's going to be released.
But the counter argument to that is it also says that barring a trade, so that would be anti-player, which to me tells me it's probably leaning more team. And I think this conversation specifically, Dave, is going to come down to the verbiage used by the guys like Tom Pelissero, Ian Rappaport, and Adam Schefter. How it's framed will tell you if it's from the agent or if it's from the team. And I think it can honestly be both. Like, it would have been great to have gotten a 5th, 6th, or 7th round pick for Garrett Bradbury, but it didn't happen. I think that's fine. I don't think we're talking about like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah like using like malpractice or anything. Like it just didn't happen. It happens. You try, you move on. It's okay.
Yeah, because Kwesi may have called all 31 other teams and go, "Hey, you want a center? We got one."
Yeah, and there's this other factor where how many teams really want a guy like Garrett Bradbury to play center? Oddly enough, at least 2. The Seahawks and Falcons would love to have Bradbury. Clint Kubiak obviously has a connection with Bradbury from his time in Minnesota. So does Sam Darnold. There is a special connection with the what hands touches the center's butt. I know that's just a funny way to say it, but there really is an important connection with the center and quarterback because there's so much continuity you need to have, communication you need to have between the two.
Forness drinking some very good Irish whiskey.
Ooh, is it a Teeling Redbreast?
Redbreast 12.
Ooh, Redbreast 12 is good. I've wanted to get the 18 or the 21 for a while.
Yeah,
I've not been willing to pull the trigger
until I win the lottery. I agree. Or the 24 or 28 or whatever it is.
I think I've seen a 31. Don't quote me on that, but it was like in the 30s, and that it was like a few $100s. But I'll stick with my like 15 years. That'll be good enough for now. Let's kind of spin this forward because I think we have a lot of really interesting things to talk about still. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Mason. This Vikings team is getting closer and closer. And to end the show, Dave, I think we should do a mock draft because we have not done a mock draft in a while. And I think there's some really interesting things to talk about. But I figured I'd at least tell you now, so production-wise, you can be ready for it because we have a little bit of time. But before we get into all of that, I think it's time that we take a moment to talk about our friends we mentioned at the top, Underdog Fantasy. And one of the cool things about Underdog Fantasy is you have March Madness coming up. This week it starts tomorrow night. First 4 games out in Dayton, Ohio, and then you're going to get 2 more of them on Wednesday. One of them with North Carolina, who did not deserve to be in the tournament. 1 in 12 in quad 1 games. Give me a break. But you can have a lot of fun. placing some lineups on tournament games that you could do one for each slate and have a lot more fun just enjoying the tournament. You don't have to know all these players. That put a couple bucks on a lineup, higher or lower on different player stats, and have a good time. You can do the flex play, which allows you to get one wrong, or you can do the standard play, which gives you significantly better returns on your investment. All you have to do is go to the Underdog Fantasy app or the website itself, underdogfantasy.com. And when you sign up, make sure you use the promo code FORNO, FORNO, to get up to $1,000 in bonus credits that will matches whatever your deposit is. The only catch is whatever's on the screen, your states, those are the ones you can be. Some states are 18, some are 19, some are 21. You are not going to want to miss it because this is a fun way to enjoy March Madness. I had a lot of fun with it this season. I had a lot of fun with it during the playoffs, and I especially had some fun during the NFL Scouting Combine. Join us. We'll have some fun plays here throughout the offseason and into the season because let me tell you, those lineups are a good time, Dave. Now, let's talk about the other lineups. What?
I want to hit a question by Skywalking McCarthy. How would you structure the Rodgers contract?
So I'm see the question now. I understand what your thought process is, and I think your thought process makes a lot of sense. If Rodgers wasn't Aaron Rodgers, if Rodgers gets comes here, it's like 2 years, 60 million, 45 of it's guaranteed. And there's not going to be a whole lot of wiggle room. Now you can do funny money, you can do void years and all that stuff. But if Rodgers comes here, he's making a bunch of money. And that's been stated multiple times. Rodgers ain't coming here for a cheap deal. Rodgers ain't coming here for a gold watch run. He's coming here to make money and win a title. But he's not doing the latter without the former. He's going to make money. So while it makes sense in theory to be like, hey, if you win the job, you get like these kind of incentives, it's not reality. It just won't happen. So the way I see it is I'm out on Rodgers. We talked about that a lot on Saturday's show, which is one of the best shows we've ever done. I highly recommend you go back and watch it. A lot of really good stuff. We went an hour and 20 minutes just kind of deciding what the hell, let's just do it. And it was a really great time. And we're going to do more of those. So I see where you're going with that, Skywalking McCarthy, which I hope is a Star Wars reference. And if it is, hell yeah, may the Force be with you. But I personally, I don't see it. But I do think, Dave, there's some other aspects to this offense that we need to talk about, one of which is the trade Saturday night. I'm taking Marzipan on a drive, getting her comfortable with riding in a car because she's very new to the pet life. She's only been in the pet life for like 3 weeks now, and she's loving it. She's been chewing on a bone nonstop behind me. But that's one of the things is they made a trade for running back. And at the exact moment, Dave, I'm like, why? This doesn't make a lot of sense. The Vikings sent pick 160 and a 2026 sixth round pick, which essentially was the pick they got for Ed Ingram, which I believe was the Vikings' original pick that they sent for Cam Akers. And in return, they get back pick 187, so 27 pick drop, and Jordan Mason. And Mason is a very interesting player. He's going into his fourth year. He's like 5'11", 220 pounds, and he performed incredibly well for the San Francisco 49ers in wide zone. He only has about, if I'm remembering correctly, 237 career carries, but he averages 5.3 yards per carry. And he's built differently than Aaron Jones. Jones is like very stout for his size because he's like 5'9", 205, something like that. Mason is much more of a power back. And what's interesting about Mason that it has not really been discussed a whole lot yet is how good he is at breaking tackles, how good he is at avoiding. According to Next Gen Stats, his missed tackle force rate, minimum 150 carries, so you have to have a good sample size, was first in the National Football League at 37.3%. Second, my boy Bucky Irving. I was right on Bucky Irving. I had a second round grade on him. I loved that dude. I didn't care if the testing was dog water. That is a football player. And you know what Jordan Mason is too? He's a bigger guy. He's going to be more of a power back for you. He can do some of like that old school Leroy Horde stuff that we saw for years and years and years. But he also can just be a wide zone back. And the Vikings got to see him in week 2 when he was still in there for Christian McCaffrey. 20 carries, 100 yards, and a touchdown. He performed very, very well. Very well. And that is objectively great for the Vikings. It is, I mean, that they got to see him, because when you see a guy up close, it's just different. That's why people flock to events like the Senior Bowl and the Combine, because seeing guys up close and personal gives you a different perspective than seeing them on TV. You get to see it, like, it just, some guys are just different in person. And Mason's a really good football player. 5.3 yard per carry average is bonkers. Now, it is a very small sample size, and I think that's really important to note, but he also signed a relatively good contract. It is an extension technically, but he was a restricted free agent with a second round tender placed on him, which is about $5.5 million. I might be off a couple $100,000 here or there, but it's in that $5.5 million range. And they signed him to a 2-year deal worth up to $12 million, 7 of it's fully guaranteed. To my knowledge, $1.5 million of it is based on incentives, and it's rolling incentives. So if they hit in 2025, then he gets more in 2026. And there's going to be these thresholds for him to hit, and I think that's an objectively good thing. Give him incentives to hit, and it's a value. I saw over the weekend somebody had compiled that, look, these guys just don't have a like, teams just don't value running backs 2s not on rookie deals. They don't pay running back 2s. So I think this might be a way where Adofo-Mensah is kind of exploiting the market a little bit. Mason's better than a standard running back 2, and he's being paid very cheap. A max value of $6 million a year isn't that much in today's market. Now, it would have been a lot a couple years ago, but the way running backs are now being treated, it's different. Najee Harris just got a 1-year deal worth up to $9.5 million. Najee Harris is not better than Jordan Mason. And Saquon Barkley is now making north of $21 million a year average annual value on that new extension. He is obviously better than Jordan Mason, but there's some metrics where Mason is very comparable to Saquon Barkley. I'm not going to blow smoke up your butts and say, oh, Jordan Mason is the next Saquon Barkley. We don't do that on this show. And I'm going to spend some time over the next couple of days really diving into the tape of Jordan Mason to try and figure out, okay, what are we looking at here? What can this guy really do well? And from what I recall in that game, and then I watched the game the next week where they played the Cardinals, he's got really good vision. He's got great balance because he's got a thick, stout frame. And he's got enough burst and juice to be able to take advantage in the intermediate. But he's only going to be a doubles hitter, maybe triples. He's not going to hit homers. But that's okay. You don't need every running back to hit home runs for you, because eventually, if you get home run hitters and they're only trying to hit home runs, guess what, Dave? They're going to strike out. Sometimes single and doubles hitters are good. So if he can average 5 yards a carry and he can break that many tackles and he can take advantage of defenses like that, that's going to give you value. If you give me 6 yards a carry, like, let's use that number because it's more than, like, a little more than 5. If you give me 6 yards a carry every single game, why would you throw the football? You would get, running it 3 times, it's almost a guaranteed first down on average. Be an incredibly high average or per odds to get a first down. That, you know what? I keep saying this every episode, but my brain is fried. My brain has been fried for weeks. And let me tell you, I fried a little bit in Mexico, but that weather was just so nice.
But his yards after contact is what's amazing. He was a top 10 running back, yards after contact, which means he gets hit, he doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm. What is the yards after contact? Do you have that in front of you, Dave?
I'm looking for it. I know we went over it yesterday, and it's like, what was it? Like 5.3 or something, or 3.5. 3.5, I believe.
3.5. yards after contact is. Dude, that rules. That's incredible. I love it. I love it. That's the kind of guy that we need. Look, the Vikings offensive line isn't going to be in some kind of distress anymore. What it is going to be is solid. And the Vikings running game needs to take advantage of it now. They need to find a way to make that happen. They need to find a way to really take advantage of those things. Marzipan, come here. Good girl. Lay down. She's still getting used to being in here for shows. She's a good girl.
And yeah. I found it. 2024 is 2.8.
Hey, that's still a good number.
Oh, it's a great number. And literally, it's top 10. He ranked 10th.
Yeah. Let's also remember those holes that are opened up by that San Francisco run game are just bonkers. The offensive line is not good at pass blocking. They're not good overall, but man, can Kyle Shanahan scheme up a run game? So I really like the addition of Mason. And you know what? Here's the best part and why we're going to do a mock draft to end the show, Dave. It changes the philosophy of how the Minnesota Vikings are going to draft. It gives them flexibility. That is the key to Adofo-Mensah. Flexibility. He wants flexibility in everything he does because he doesn't want to be pigeonholed and forced to do any specific thing. If he's not forced to do any specific thing, he can do anything he wants. And that's what a good manager does. My goal when I was a manager, my goal is to not have to do anything. So then I can do everything. Because if there isn't a single task that I have to do to focus on, like especially running a restaurant, if I have to help cook on the grill all shift, I can't do the rest of my duties. So if I have people in every single spot that do their jobs well, that means we are running like a well-oiled machine. And guess what? I can do everything. I can help everybody for like 30 seconds at a time. And then morale is higher. I can run food. I can talk to tables. I can do all kinds of things. And that means that I am doing more than just one specific thing. And that's kind of what Adofo-Mensah is looking at. You don't want to be like, I need to come out of this first round with this position. You want to be, okay, I want to come out of this first round with a guy who's going to be a difference maker. That is what the Minnesota Vikings want. And that is the position they find themselves in. Because guess what? You don't have to draft a running back to be a contributor. If you draft a running back, it means you love them. It means you believe in them long term. Now the Vikings have what? They're going to need a new starting running back in theory in 2 years. Well, you take a guy in round 4 or round 5. Guess what? That guy is going to have 2 years as RB3, work himself in, and then guess what? He takes over. Like, this is how the Vikings are processing things. This is how they're doing it. And it's great stuff. They are finding a way. Marzipan, get out of there. Those are cables. You don't eat those. It's just such a breath of fresh air for the Minnesota Vikings to be in this position, Dave. They are flexible. They are making great decisions. I love this. This is awesome. This is not what we had with Rick Spielman, who was very rigid. And there are a lot of people who be like, well, Kwesi's not a traditional like scout. Well, one of the things about traditional scouts is too often because, well, they don't have the bandwidth to do this like an actual scout does, like time-wise, because they have so many responsibilities. But they rely too much on their own evaluations when their own evaluations can be more flawed because they just don't have the time because they have so many responsibilities. Whereas if you're an area scout for like the Southeast, you spend a lot of time watching Florida State, Alabama, Clemson, and you're going to know those guys inside and out because of how much time you have spent focusing on that region. That in itself is where being just a general manager who is looking at the big picture and absorbing all the information and then making a decision. That's where that can be incredibly valuable. And guess what? This acquisition of Jordan Mason allows Adofo-Mensah to continue that flexibility. Dave, it's great. It's fantastic. Like, We never had this with Spielman, and now we're in a great spot.
I agree. I liked it. It was surprising, and I thought it was a good trade, great value, and I think we don't have to worry about taking a running back first unless we want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to address a couple things in the chat. Then we're going to move on to Justin Jefferson and then our mock draft. Baron Bigley, I think this is the first time I've seen you in the chat. Welcome, sir, or ma'am. Says Will Fries cannot run block at all. He's decent pass blocking though. I can't disagree more. I recommend you go check out my piece on Will Fries where I broke down the film and kind of talked about it. This dude, he's not Steve Hutchinson, but he's got a mentality of Steve Hutchinson where we just want to beat your ass. We haven't had that in the interior of the offensive line in a long time. And I think there's still a lot of upside to Fries because he barely played. He was the 250th overall pick out of Penn State as a tackle. Penn State kicked him side to guard. He's only played one snap at left tackle his entire career. They kick him inside to guard, and he has a solid season last year, and he's on track for a great season 24 before breaking his tibia. Theoretically, he should be back to that great status this year. And I think he's going to be awesome in that role. I really do. And then Jose Verdeja, I hope I said your name right. Sometimes I can get last names wrong, but he said Spielman was the worst. He got Ponder, kept him for 6 years while he had Peterson. Well, he was the starter for 3, and they benched him in year 4, and then his contract expired, and they said bye-bye. So not quite 6. It felt like it, though. That Ponder pick was the worst, and I'm shocked he survived it, but he did do a really good job of building a team outside of Christian Ponder. And I think that's why he did get to keep his job. But let's talk about Justin Jefferson, because he is a guy that kind of gets put on the back burner with some of these discussions because we're bringing in all these new players. We're elevating the roster around him. But Jefferson is the best wide receiver in football. I will listen to an argument about Jamar Chase, and there's a reason why I bring him up. If you want to tell me Jamar Chase is the best wide receiver in football, okay. I think you're just talking about semantics at that point because they're both so good. But the reason why we bring it up is Chase signed a record contract, 4 years, $161 million extension, making him the highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the National Football League. An honor that Justin Jefferson held until February when Max Crosby signed a contract worth $35.5 million average annual value. The reason why we bring up this Chase contract is because Justin Jefferson at $5.25 million less per year than Chase certainly feels like a bargain now, doesn't it? And this is why signing guys as early as you can is going to reflect well. Danielle Hunter signed too early. Not only did he sign too early, he signed for too little. He took a bad contract. And he ended up getting about 20% more than what that original contract was worth by the time it expired. Because they played the game. They had to fight and claw for what they got. But you know what? He earned that money. Jefferson signed a record-setting contract, $5 million more per year than any receiver had ever gotten. So you know, okay, this is a generational player. You're giving him generational money. He's earned it. All right, let's go. Now, salary cap-wise, you'd be like, man, I wish we could have gotten him for cheaper. But this is how the Wilfs and the Minnesota Vikings do business. They do right by their players, Dave. They do right. And because they do right, it's a great thing. This is why they're number 2 in that NFLPA survey. You got to do right by the people that are developed within your 4 walls. And now Jefferson is somehow a bargain at $35 million a year. If he needed a contract extension right now, Dave, he'd get 41 or 42. So now all of a sudden you're looking at a guy who would make 20% more than what he's making now. He's a bargain. And it's so crazy to think about, but he is. He's a bargain.
No, I agree. It blows my mind what Cincinnati's doing. They've got big money for Jamar Chase. Obviously, T. Higgins got a big contract. And their quarterback Joe Burrow did. I heard today that those three people alone cover 47% of the cap for the offense.
Based on their average annual value, I think that's correct. I'd have to look at the mitigating cap hits because like cash versus cap is always so different.
Right, but based on AAV, yeah,
it's going to cause them problems. The reason why the Eagles are able to do this and the Bengals aren't is because the Eagles historically just do really well at drafting the trenches and developing the trenches. And because you do that, you can afford to pay Jalen Hurts $51 million average annual value, AJ Brown $33 million average annual value, Devontae Smith $24 million average annual value. Those guys make up what that number would be $108 million on the cap. That's not including your high-priced offensive line. Why? Because they hit in so many draft picks. They consistently hit on guys. They hit on first, second, third, fourth rounders. I don't know what the Eagles do, but they just make it work with their scouting, their drafting, and their developing. The Bengals don't. They're bad at all three. They're not good drafters. They're not good scouts because they have like a scouting staff of 3 people, and they're not good developers. Now they hit on Chase, they hit on Burrow, and they deserve credit for being so bad that they were in position to pick those guys. They do really deserve credit for T. Higgins, though. I will give them that. But so often that you look at these past draft classes and they're not bringing in guys who are difference makers. And that's why the Bengals are where they're at and the Eagles are reigning Super Bowl champions. So if the Bengals want to take that next step, they're going to have to figure those other things out. And until then, they just made Justin Jefferson seem like a bargain. Hallelujah. Adofo-Mensah, like they wanted to get him signed the year before. There was a deal on the table. I think it was for $28 million. Jefferson said, no, I want to let it ride. And who can blame him? I would have let it ride too. There is always a danger to waiting it out. But if you wait it out and you stay healthy and you play well, you make way more money. So it's a calculated risk. Jefferson took it. He wanted to sign the deal. He got the deal. They basically gave him an entire week of like, hey, we're going to celebrate you. And he is the best receiver in the National Football League and has a chance to be considered the best wide receiver of all time when his playing days are done. He's got a long way to go, but he's got a chance. And at $35 million a year, that's a bargain. And we'll take that every day of the week. Now, Dave, are you ready?
Well, I just want to ask the people, what if JJ isn't good to go? Well, the Vikings cleared him a couple weeks ago. KOC
I thought they said that he was going to be cleared by April, not that he was cleared now.
I thought they said it cleared now, but I'm not worried about it.
I'm not either.
All right.
I'm not worried about it at all.
What are you trying to tell me? Do you want to do a draft?
Let's do a draft.
Okay. Welcome to Vikings First and SKOL's Mock Draft Mondays. Who will the Vikings pick? And who's your favorite choice?
All right, let's do this. So one of the things as Dave gets everything set up, we are going to take this in the perspective of what would the Vikings do based on best player available? How would they handle it? And we've got little Marzipan here, and she is just happy as a clam. She is ready to rock and roll. So Dave, let's get it going. 7 rounds, Minnesota Vikings. Bada bing, bada boom. All right. Who is available? Who wants to trade with us?
We got the Eagles.
Who else is in that drop down?
I'm looking.
But you got to click that arrow with the Eagles.
Yeah. The Raiders, Cowboys, Colts, and the Pukers.
Okay. Oh, the Pukers. The Pukers are too far down. So are the Colts and Cowboys. The Raiders are kind of borderline. The Eagles maybe. Who's up? Let's take a look at the board and let's see if there's anybody worth taking. Because I mean, we could trade down and manipulate this 10 ways from Sunday. But I do think it's interesting to kind of look at what the board is.
I say Kenneth Grant. He's there.
No, Kenneth Grant is just got picked by the Steelers.
Oh, well, all right. I'm blind. Let's see who's available. I know it's one of these drop downs.
It's you got to scroll down below the Vikings logo.
I wish you could drive this.
Me too. There we go. All right, so we got Luther Burden the third, Emeka Egbuka, and I think this is a lot of what we're going to be talking about here. And this is what I mean: best player available. This is what best player available can look like. It can look like a wide receiver, and I do think the idea of a wide receiver here is fascinating. One, you can argue right now that wide receiver 3 is the single biggest need remaining on this football team. Well, we can talk about backup quarterback, but if Brett Rippon's your backup, who cares? They'll bring in another guy. I'm not worried about that. I don't think it's worth panicking about. I also think they could just wait until after the draft and bring in a guy because it'll be cheaper and you won't count towards the compensatory pick formula. I think Burden and Egbuka could fit those roles really well. I also think it's important to note, Dave, that I have started a lot of my research for that. I'm doing a huge project breaking down Adofo-Mensah's draft strategy. Here's what I found. His first round pick was at 32, and it was Lewis Seen, just over 22 and a half years old. The other 3 first round picks at the time of being drafted were approximately 21 years and 3 months old. I don't have it broken down to the day, but I have a range. So I like if they were born in April and it's August, that's like 21.3. Right? So they like to take young football players, which means Darius Alexander off the board. He's 25. Derek Harmon, I believe, is 23. Off the board. Too old. And this is where like Walter Nolan, 21 on the board. Omarion Hampton, 21 on the board. Luther Burden III, the wide receiver from Missouri, 21 on the board. They're going to take young early, and they're going to worry less about age now. Joanne says if you take a wide receiver now, Jordan Addison's dad will go off and he'll start to ask for be traded. Look, sure, let Jordan Addison's dad go off, but if you have the conversation, be like, hey, we're in it for a Super Bowl. You're a wide receiver too, but we're going to fortify the position. We're going to get a super team. I don't think Addison's going to care. Plus, you're going to need somebody for at least the first 3 games. And look, if you draft a player to play for 3 games, it's stupid. There was a mock draft I saw earlier from a very reputable website. This was like a month or so ago. Had the Vikings taking like an offensive tackle because Christian Darrisaw might miss the beginning of the year. No, that is malpractice. You take a guy because they're talented and you believe they're going to win. You figure out how to replace them for that short time. So kind of looking at this whole process, I love Emeka Egbuka. I think he's probably going to be my wide receiver too when this is all said and done, but he's a little older. He's going to be a full 22. Luther Burden is young. He is electric. I know a friend of the show, Thorne Nystrom, kind of compared him to Percy Harvin. I don't see that. I think he's a lighter Debo, where you kind of use him in the same ways you use Debo, but he's not that same type of player that Debo is. I think he's really good at acceleration and deceleration. He's really good with the ball in his hands, creating yards after the catch. He might be the best in his class. And that kind of guy is something this Vikings offense just doesn't have, because Jefferson isn't really that guy. Addison's not really that guy. Hawkinson's not. He could add an element that you don't have. And this is where creating that basketball team. Like if Tetaroa McMillan from Arizona is there, I'm taking him in a heartbeat. A 6'5", 212-pound guy who glides like a gazelle in the open field, knows how to separate, knows how to utilize his body to keep separation. Hell yeah. So, Dave, we're going to go a little off the wall. We're going to take Luther Burden the third, and we're not going to do a trade down. We're going to take the wide receiver from Missouri. And this is where BPA can actually take effect, because you know what? You don't have to worry about fortifying a single position because you're not in a desperate state. That's a huge factor here. Now we can kind of look forward. What should the Vikings do with their next pick? So we're going to look a little bit more in depth at what the board is, because I'm not the biggest fan of the PFF board as a whole. I think Trevor is a great guy and he works incredibly hard, but I have some discrepancies on how I view players versus how he does. So Andrew Makuba at the safety from Texas at the top is really intriguing to me. Really good ball hawk, and we do need safety depth. I think he could be a really, really good player. You have Tate Ratledge and Jared Wilson, the Georgia offensive lineman. Charles Grant provides some inside-out flexibility, tackle from William and Mary. The Vikings historically don't like to take players from non-Power 5 schools. The only players that they've taken from non-Power 5 schools are Levi Drake Rodriguez in round 7, Dwayne McBride in round 7. The only players they have taken from non-Power now Power 4 institutions. So the Vikings don't necessarily like to do that. There's some basis in that. That goes back to Andrew Berry, who Kwesi Adofo-Mensah learned from in in Cleveland. So I don't think the Vikings will make a move like that. Scroll all the way back up to the top, Dave. There's not a ton. I think the one guy that I really like here, as we're looking at talent, I would take Andrew Makuba, because I do think that there is a really interesting prospect there. Good ball hawking safety, understands how to handle coverage, and you do need a safety. Safety is a need for this team because they just don't have the depth right now. Their safety 4 is like Bubba Bolden. No, you need somebody more than that. All right, come up here, girl. Oh, there we go, Marzi. You're okay. All right, so this is an interesting one. I really like Torrey Horton, but the Vikings already took a receiver, so I don't think he would be on the board at this point. But if he's available and the Vikings haven't taken a receiver, I'd love Torrey Horton, because he can work inside and out. He's handled an incredibly high volume, and he understands how to create his own separation and win at the catch point. Chase Lunt is like a 6'8" tackle who's incredibly athletic, but I think where the Vikings are at a tackle, I don't think that would be in play for them. Quinn Ewers is a bad quarterback. Don't touch him. Riley Leonard is basically a fullback at quarterback. I wouldn't touch him. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's a very interesting one. He was a transfer into Arizona. He played in just one game as Marzipan makes her Real Forno Show debut. Keep scrolling. Ajay Cornelius, like I said, tackles probably not one. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Billy Bowman Jr. would be a fun one, but we just took a safety, so maybe that's not necessarily the best bet.
Are we going to draft tight end?
Oh, we could look at tight end. Is that Benjamin Urasek? Yeah,
Yep.
My screen is blurry, so it's harder for me to read some of these names. I think Urasek could be an interesting option, especially because he's more of a well-rounded type of player. Is that
Billy Bowman?
Yeah, it's
Khalil Mullings, Tyler Barron.
Oh, here we go. Jake Burning Stool. That's the guy, Clemson. That's a tight end. That is an elite level pass catcher. That's who we should take here, Dave. get that developmental tight end in the building, bulk him up a little bit because he's going to need a little bit of bulking up. But he's a really good pass catcher, knows how to separate, knows how to attack at the catch point. And that's honestly the most valuable part of being a tight end. They already have the blocker in Josh Oliver, who I would hope gets extended at some point because of what kind of value he brings to the team. So Brenning Stool would be my guy. What do you think, Marzipan? Yep. Yeah, she approves. All right. Tyler Shuck. Yeah, it looks like show, but it's pronounced Shuck. Don't ask. I don't know. But yeah, it's pronounced Shuck. Emory Jones Jr. is an interesting one. I like him. I also think he's got inside flexibility. So if you're taking an offensive lineman this late, you should be able to play inside and out. Curtis Rourke tore his ACL in fall camp, and then ended up still playing the entire season. That is a tough guy. But he probably doesn't get drafted. And as Marzipan jumps down, is that Caleb Ransom?
It is. Ransaw.
He is an athletic monster. I think at this point, Dave, I would go Emory Jones Jr. from LSU. I think there's real tackle upside, but his profile might fit best at guard. And I think that's a really intriguing piece for the Minnesota Vikings to kind of wrap this whole thing up. Kind of weird that we went 3 offensive positions here, but this is where BPA can take you. It can take you into a different realm. It can take you into different areas that you may not have done. And I know Skywalking McCarthy asked about Oronde Gadsden. I love Gadsden's game. I think he's a great pass catcher. I also don't think he profiles at all as a tight end you can use in line. I think he's more of a big slot, kind of like how Dalton Kincaid is used in Buffalo. I would rather take a guy that I believe I could develop a little bit more as a blocker. Gadsden, I don't see that profile, but I do love the football player. That guy just knows how to win. He knows how to attack, and he knows how to catch the football in traffic and sky up for it. So I would be more than happy to take Gadsden, but I don't think they would. GP asks, how's Bo Nix looking? Still can't stand watching him play. No, I just think Bo Nix is being overrated, and I think you can look at some of the underlying metrics, and he was barely better than Russell Wilson. He's still struggles throwing the football down the field. So I'm out. But we'll see. He has plenty of time to prove me wrong, and if he does, I will eat crow. But I'm not going to crown a guy who's only played goodish football in 1 year. Mac Jones made the Pro Bowl his rookie year, and then he was bad the rest of his career. So we'll give it time. But I'm guessing this is probably a B+ draft for us, Dave.
It's showing A- for Luther Burden, A- for Andrew Makuba, C- for Jake Briningstool, and B for Emory Jones.
No, what's the overall grade? B+.
B+.
All right. Marzi. Nope. You're chewing on cords. You can't do that. Well, that is our show, Dave. Good mock draft. A lot of interesting news, and we're going to have more on Wednesday night. And if something big breaks, we'll be going live.
And watch for Wednesday for a time change. Just letting people know.
You heard it here first. Watch for a time change on Wednesday. Best way to do it, you got to subscribe, turn those notifications on. So you know when we're going live, it's going to give you a half-hour warning. And then it's going to give you like, hey, we are going live when Dave hits that live button. And you won't want to miss it. You never know when Miss Marzipan is going to make a brief appearance on camera. And that is something you don't want to miss. I know you guys love when Dolly makes the camera. And Miss Marzipan is also a Boston Terrier. So we'll be back Wednesday. If something breaks, we will go live. And let me tell you, this is going to be a fun offseason for us here at Vikings First and SKOL because the Minnesota Vikings are preparing for a Super Bowl run. Get excited. Get ready. Thank you guys so much for joining. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community. that we all love our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching the Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!